Pete here from A Bit Twisted. So sitting here at my vintage Ashford Traditional with it's Scotch Tension setup, Scotch Tension wheel. Since it's an early version, it's not so early that it has leather, but it still has the plastic bushings for the flyer. It only has one Whorl on the flyer. So it's just a single speed on the flyer, and then our Scotch tension around the bobbin. And I was talking with someone today, and they were being discouraged from buying a wheel that only has a single Whorl on it, because this person has been making spinning with her drop spindle, basically fingering weight and doing three-ply. And so I was assuming that she was doing three-ply fingering weight, meaning that she needs to spin really, really thin and then three-ply it and get your fingering weight from that. But it's fingering weight singles, and then triple that up and getting a DK weight. And I didn't want to argue with the person, because their friend was saying, well, you got to have a wheel that has multiple Whorls on it. You can't just have one with a single Whorl. And so yes, multiple Whorls can come in handy, but on the average size Whorl, which this one is, will do the job for literally anything. A lot of it has to do with technique and fiber prep, and there's no reason that you can't do a lace weight single and then three-ply it into a three-ply fingering weight, which is what I'm going to attempt to do, because I want this person to see that a single Whorl Scotch tension spinning wheel can do that. It's not necessary to have all these bells and whistles on things that you're not going to use. It's one of the things that people get hung up on, is you got to have all the bells and whistles. Well, if you got to have all the bells and whistles, you might as well go out and buy a factory, because it has all the bells and whistles. So if you just want to do some spinning, a very basic wheel, don't have to spend a lot of money. You can spend under $200. If you're lucky, you can go find a wheel and maybe get it for $100. And if it needs a little work, put a couple bucks into it and you're good. Because if you're learning this and you decide you don't like it, you haven't invested a lot of money that you may not get back out. But on a wheel like this, if you spent $150, $200, you can probably resell it for that without any trouble, if you don't like it. So that's the benefit of that. But basically, I just wanted to show that you don't have to have all the bells and whistles. You do have to have a good technique, and it takes practice. It takes time to learn. But I took the time to learn. I took 8 years to learn. It doesn't come overnight. It's just a thing. And so what I'm doing is I took some roving, like so, and white and gray, and blended it with my cards, and came out with a nice gray rolag. And that's what I'm spinning onto the bobbin right now. And got the tension So right now I can pull back, and it's not too much tension, but it's enough to take it up. And that's what you want. You don't want too much tension. And then you can just do short back, or short forward. I like doing back because I can control and see kind of how thin it is, and then I let go and let it twist. And because this is on the camera, you don't get three dimension here. I can show you that this is really thin here. So one is all just twist that up, and there's my thread, and it's still really thin even after it's been plied on itself. And I always use a yarn gauge, and the very topmost one here is lace weight. Pull this out a little bit, set that right in there, and it's right in the lace weight for a single. So I'm going to triple this, and might get a fingering. I might actually even get into the sport weight on a 3-ply, but not likely. And I'm definitely not going to get into the DK here. So probably still going to be in the fingering, maybe the thicker fingering weight when I'm done doing 3-ply. And so the trick is a light, airy rolag or roving, and a light tension. So while it's spinning, I can pull back on it. Pull back, no problem. It's not going to yank it out of my hand, but it will take it up when I let it go. And so I let it go and make sure there's a little bit of tension on there, because you want it to wind nicely onto your bobbin. And it's just your typical Ashford Scotch Tension spinning wheel. You can still buy parts for it. All the stuff that they have for the new traditionals will fit on this one. So if you wanted, you could buy a new bobbin or a new flyer with bobbins and put it on this machine, and it will work just fine. But as it is, I want to show that we can still spin thin. And then we're going to take this off. I'm going to put it on my counter, and I'm going to split what I spin here into thirds onto 3 separate bobbins. And then I'm going to ply those 3 together to get a nice 3-ply. So when this is done, since this is a rolag, it's probably going to come out a little bit fluffier than if I was doing worsted weight or worsted spinning, and that's fine. So it could get up into the thin sport weight when we're done. So then this is why you do testing with your wool prior to doing your project, to make sure that you're spinning it correctly, to get the right final size that you want for your project, because your project may require DK weight or sport weight or even fingering weight. And if you want 3-ply fingering when you're done, you have to spin pretty thin right out of the gate. It's very spinning lace weight. And then when you 3-ply it, you're going to have a nice, really nice, thin 3-ply yarn. And it will look good, and it will knit well. It will be nice. And so I'm gonna stop and change a hook. It's time to do that. So this one also only has 5 hooks. I would recommend, on if you have something like this, to put an extra hook in between or over on this side, but have it in the middle so they're offset. So you have at least 9 hooks. If you're spinning thin, it makes your bobbin smoother. It's just don't have to. As you can see, this is, even with this super thin, it's still filling up the bobbin pretty nicely without any issues. Just don't let your yarn build up, because it can start to get away from you and get all loose and floppy, and you don't want that on your bobbin. And so that's the deal. And I also wanted to do the video because I want to show you so you can see that I'm actually spinning as thin as I'm saying I'm spinning. Stop the wheel. And once again, I'm going to put this right up to it, and we're still falling in that lace weight range. And I recommend getting one of these that actually has grooves in it. Just keep it on your lap and keep checking just to make sure your thread is within the range that you need it or want it. So you can have lace weight singles, and then you can check against the gauge when you're plying, and you'll see what kind of weight your ply is. And so I recommend just to do small batches. And if you're a 3-ply person, make sure you split up what you make on the bobbin into thirds, and test it and see if it's going to give you, like I said just a minute ago, the size that you want, finished size. And then if your wool has to be washed again because it might still have some lanolin in it, wash it, then check it, because washing will make it fluff up some more. And since this wool is already washed, don't have to rewash it again. Whatever it is, it is. Might fluff up just a tiny bit, but not too likely, too much. Not enough to hurt your pattern. And so I'm gonna let you go for a few until I get my 3 bobbins together, because I only have like one more row lag here. I'm gonna spin, and then I'll split it up so I'm not spinning too much. And this is just a test to show on video what you can do with an old wheel that only has a single whorl on it. And it suited people just fine back in the day. There's no reason it can't suit you just fine today. So there's no difference between then and now, except more years have passed from then till now. But it will still do the same thing as it did originally. And as you can see, it's doing just a bang up job. And again, I can pull back on it. Make sure your tension's right. If your tension's off a little bit, you can give it a little bit more or give it a little bit less. So you can pull back on it, but still have just a light tug to draw it on. But definitely not too much, because the thinner you're spinning, the less drag you want on this, but always enough to still draw it on, but not to yank it out of your hands, because you're holding your hand pretty loose. So let's I'm going to change my hook again. and finish up this last row lag, and then we'll catch up with you here in just a few. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take all three of these bobbins here, and we're going to ply them together. And these three are all lace weight. That was 100 meters. And now we're going to be at 33. For a finished of 3 of these. So let's, okay, can't do anything there. Got to get my tensioner on. So we're gonna we're doing 3. Winding it on. So let's go check our finished size here. So our finished size is I would call that with a little tension on it, that's in the fingering weight. A little less tension on it is in the thin sport weight. So fingering weight. So I'm going to call it fingering weight. A little bit of tension on it. Right there. And that's 3-ply. This is not your standard 2-ply. So let's go ahead and just finish this up. And that's just with a Scotch Tension wheel. With a single whorl. And most of the time you're using the single whorl anyway, so you just pick one that you like. Since you have one, that's all you have, so you learn with what you have. And that's all you can do. It's just do with what you have. So now it's a little bit thicker there. So just kind of show that I'm not being overly consistent. So That's definitely in the sport weight right there. So it's fluctuating between fingering and sport. Excuse me. And it is a woolen prep. So I'm not surprised at that. But still, it's just goes to show, you can do it. With a single wheel, single whirl, and do just fine. No bells, no whistles. Not on this old gal here. Not at all. A lot of it's in the fiber prep, your control of the wheel, your tension. It all plays a part in what you can do with what you have. So if you want to spend more money on a machine with a few more bells and whistles, you can. And that's fine. That's up to you. And I sell wheels that have more than just this, but don't need it. And it's a very robust wheel, even though it's an oldie. It's just a tool. What can you do with the tool that you have? What can you build? And I've just built some fingering sport weight with this tool. And yes, you do need some experience, but you learn. I started out 8 years ago not knowing a single thing about this, doing this stuff. Not a thing. And this is what I can do. And I learned by watching, listening, commenting, asking questions, all on Facebook. So you don't need anything fancy. You don't need fancy lessons. Just the willingness to learn. And I was determined. And this is the result. I don't think you want to go buy a factory. A $3,000 spinning wheel can do the same as this $200 spinning wheel. That little Volkswagen Beetle will get you to the same place as that Lamborghini. So they're both tools to get you from point A to point B. Don't need people saying, "Oh, looky, looky, look at all that. Look at how rich they are." Yeah, don't need it. It's okay if they are. Even if I was, I wouldn't need to buy a fancy wheel. I've got all 3 fibers separated with my fingers so they don't get tangled up. So check again. Thin sport, thick fingering. So that's where we're at for the final 3-ply. Not even my standard 2-ply. Three-ply is typically what you're going to find in machine-made thread yarn or more. Makes more of a round yarn, where 2-ply doesn't really do that. Now that we have the thread done, the 3-ply, we have basically a fingering, between a fingering and sport weight of yarn in 3-ply from the spinning wheel that has a single whorl, single speed. And so to deal with that, you would spin a little faster, a little slower, whatever you might need depending on what kind of yarn you're making. And so this is just mainly a test. I wasn't too worried about being a little twisty, but it actually turned out pretty nice. Not very twisty at all. So most of the energy was removed when it was plied. And I'm really happy for that. So that's basically what we ended up getting for this little project of spinning a 3-ply on this old wheel that just has a single Whorl on it. Yes, it would be, would be beneficial if you had more, but if you're just starting out, it's hard to beat. It's hard to beat this. And the other thing I was thinking about, if you have been spinning, let's say with a drop spindle, and you've been able to do this 3-ply, maybe 3-ply DK weight or sport weight, or even bigger, if you can do it on a drop spindle, you can do it on anything. So in the drop spindle, you control how many times you spin it. No different. You just control how much you spin, or treadle, which is the same, basically the same thing. And so my next bit is I'm going to put this yarn on double pointed needles and see if I can knit some of this stuff in the round, just to see if I can make like maybe a simple hat, or at least the starting of a little hat for a little person or a doll or something, just to see what this is like. So you can see this part's already twisted up a little bit, and that's because I've been trying to knit it and make mistakes, because I'm not a knitter. But I like this. So one thing, even though I'm not a knitter, one of the things I found was controlling the drag while you're knitting through the hand. And I find that 2-ply doesn't glide through the hand very well, but 3-ply does, because it's round. And so in most of the yarns that you buy are 3-ply or more, and they're round. So I'm going to try again, and if it's successful, I think I might switch to doing 3-ply yarn instead of 2-ply, or require more from me, but that's okay. And I can also make a thicker yarn. Start out with a little bit thicker single, maybe a single this size instead of a triple this size, and go with that, and see what that's like with the yarn. And this is all experimenting for myself, just to kind of see. And the other thing I was learning in this process is drafting. So when you draft, you want to be fairly consistent with how much you draft out versus how many times the wheel is spinning. And the more consistent you are at a distance short, if your fibers are short, you have to draft short. You can't draft long. Could do a long draw, but you'd have to be fairly consistent with that too. A specific length long draw, for each revolution of the wheel. Because if you're doing short, and then long, and short, and long, and short, and long, and short, and long, you get all these sections that have different twist energies in them. And then you get twisty yarn in the end, where it's not just nice and straight like this stuff right here. So that's my next step. And this is after 8 years of working at it and learning. So I'm still learning from people. And so I need to experiment with that and see. Because when I pull it off of my nitty knotty and it just rolls up like this, then I've got too much twist in it. And if I do that and part of it's more twisty than other parts, then that means I wasn't drafting very well. But if it just hangs straight with no twisting or anything, it's perfect. And I've done it a few times where my drafting was very consistent, my treadling was consistent, and all that. So time to work on a little bit more consistency. Yes, even after 8 years of doing this, I'm learning, but turns out good. So there you have it, and we will talk to you later. Pete here from A Bit Twisted.